once we post it. So welcome everybody. We're super excited to have the Samara Centre here. We were so privileged to work with them and the amazing podcast that I sadly admit that when I described it to people, they go, "Oh, all right." And I'm like, "No, listen to it. When you listen to the podcast, it is fantastic. It's such a well created, engaging document." So I'm just going to turn the time over to Beatrice.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. Let me just make sure that I can pull up our slides so I can share with you what is interesting and good about this podcast and why you should consider using it in your classroom. Here we go. Can you see these?
Yeah, now it's better.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, so thank you all for being here. I am very excited to be here to talk about Humans of the House. As Dan mentioned, I'm Beatrice Wayne. I am the research director at the Samara Centre for Democracy, and I am just really, really excited to be here with you all today. I'm going to talk to you about bringing civic education into your classrooms and bringing it to life through Humans of the House, which is our podcast. Let's make sure I can go to the next slide. Okay, so the Samara Centre for Democracy is a national nonpartisan charity that is committed to securing an accessible, responsive, and inclusive democratic culture in Canada. We're focused on creating a resilient democracy with an engaged public and responsive institutions. And in case you're wondering about the name, we often get asked if the founder of the Samara Centre had a daughter named Samara. That's not the case. Actually, Samara is the winged helicopter seed that falls from a maple tree, you know, the like one that spins as it falls down. So the idea is from small seeds, big democratic ideas can grow. So it's a metaphor. We strive to use cutting-edge research to strengthen civic engagement and to secure transparency from political structures. And we turn the insights from our research into resources that are used by active citizens, public leaders, and the media, but from our perspective, most importantly, teachers. So one of our flagship projects at the Samara Centre involves conducting exit interviews with former members of parliament. And we've done this for a number of years now. We're right now carrying out the third evolution of the project. It was originally, we published the best-selling book Tragedy in the Commons, and then the follow-up publication, Real Housewives. Yes, it's a play on Real Housewives. Was deliberately done. So up to now, we have completed 166 interviews with former parliamentarians. So MPs that worked between 2006 and 2021, or the 38th to 43rd parliaments. So in these interviews, former parliamentarians reflect on their experiences, the challenges they faced, and their views on Parliament's performance. And as Jen mentioned, that sounds perhaps a little bit dry, but these conversations are actually really, really illuminating because respondents aren't campaigning anymore. So they're really open about recounting their memories, their achievements, their strategies, and really like the highs and lows. And they're really high highs, but also really low lows that they talk about really emotionally and forthcomingly. So to sum up, the Samara Centre has been studying the lived experience of Canadian elected officials for over 15 years now. I'm providing this information mostly just as background to sort of give you context for the podcast, because we've taken 12 interviews from our most recent part of the study and created what is now an award-winning and chart-topping podcast, Humans of the House. It's available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, anywhere where you access podcasts, you can find it. And it is also available on YouTube, as we understand that this is preferred for easy use in the classroom. So we hope that makes it sort of easier to incorporate. The MPs from the podcast come from a range of backgrounds and different party affiliations. And you can listen to them being really forthcoming about how they feel about the House of Commons, how they feel about party politics, polarization, and the experience of being an MP. We've had a really great response from listeners who tell us it's accessible, it's interesting, and it helps listeners better understand how our government works, not in a like eat your vegetables sort of way, but in a way that really helps them become engaged in the question of how politics works in Canada. So there are 6 episodes you can see here, and they take the listener through different stages of an MP's journey. The first episode is titled You Want to Run, and it explores what drives people to run for political office. It looks at the unique journeys that brought the MPs we interviewed to Ottawa, and it also provides a background on the nominations process that determines our electoral candidates in the first place. So that's sort of an informational aspect of that first episode. The second episode is called Show Up and Glow Up, and former MPs take us inside their very first days on Parliament Hill. So it answers questions like, what does an MP do in an average week? Where do they go? And as they settle into their new jobs, are they being set up to serve Canadians well? The third episode is The Best Worst Place I've Ever Worked, and it asks what Parliament Hill is like as a workplace. Former MPs tell us how they were treated on the job, and how they experienced things both inside and beyond the House of Commons. So in the House of Commons and also in their constituencies, in their just walking through their ridings and online. The fourth episode is called Unwritten Rules, and it asks the question, who is an MP's real boss? Is it their party leader, or is it Canadians? Is it themselves? So the episode really explores partisan politics and party power. Former MPs tell their stories about learning unwritten rules, striking out on their own, making compromises, and forming unlikely friendships. I'm going to say the F word is the 5th episode, and it looks at the process of trying to make change from an MP's point of view. So it really asks the question, what does it take for MPs to make a difference, to make change once in the House of Commons? And then the final episode is, was it worth it? And that looks at the final chapter of an MP's civic journey. So what is it like to leave office, whether they resigned, decided not to run again, or lost an election? Former MPs tell their stories about leaving Parliament. And that's actually, I will say, just personally, my favorite of all the episodes. It's very poignant and surprisingly moving. So,
Can I just jump in here for a sec?
oh yeah, please
If you
do.
just go back to that previous slide,
Yeah.
I just want to kind of share with some people,
You know
and Kevin wants to jump in as well, of kind of the insights that I found fascinating. Like in the first episode, it perfectly describes the power of a teacher. One of them decided to run because one of his assignments was either you write an essay or you help a political party. And that's what got him interested. And then the Show Up and Glow Up episode, I was fascinated by the fact that they have to become office managers. You don't think about this, but these politicians actually have to figure out how to run their office, and you get no training on it. And the best first place I ever worked, and so like that Show Up and Glow Up is great for like if you have a careers kind of a class. And the best worst place I ever worked is fantastic if you have like a women's studies course or some like social justice, because it talks about the sexism and misogyny that a lot of women experience. You know, the unwritten rules, of course, is perfect for party solidarity and that sort of a thing. I'm going to say the F word has a whole bunch of Indigenous issues. So if you're teaching a course relating to Indigenous issues, that's a perfect episode for that. And then Was It Worth It? Again, fits really nicely with a careers course of just, did you want to do that? So it's not just, you know, social studies and politics and parliament. They actually fit with a ton of different courses.
Right, and I think what we're trying to do too is make it accessible and relatable. Certainly with the activities that were supposed to be kind of the hook to bring them in. I remember for the best place I ever worked was, you know, like where the activities we came up with was the idea that, you know, relatable, you know, to do, you know, have you been part of a toxic workplace before? What was it like? But what struck me with the last one was just you know, the frankness in which these MPs were talking, and I sticks out to me is Scott Bryson when he said, you know, he you know, he's got I think 2 daughters, and he said I would not deter them from doing what I did, you know, despite the challenges. So, but yeah, I think throughout, I think the you know, the the candid way that people were sharing their experiences, and they definitely with some vulnerability. It was really I really enjoyed working on this, and yeah, really. So for anyone who hasn't had a chance, it's very accessible. Okay, and the production value is really great. So.
I'm glad. I'll play a clip from the trailer so you can get a sense of the production value, and then also have a clip from Show Up and Glow Up to share with you. But I thank you for those points, Jen, particularly about the different ways in which the episodes can connect to different aspects of the curriculum. That is something with Show Up and Glow Up I thought was something that, you know, I had never considered, that all of these different people coming into the job, some of them are coming from very different career backgrounds. Some of them have experience with management, but some of them are coming with no experience of managing a staff at all, and they have to learn how to do that on the job, which is an interesting sort of consideration and definitely something that could be really get students thinking about their own careers and how it might connect to politics down the line. So I will play a clip from the trailer to just give you a sense of it, and then also then a little clip from Show Up and Glow Up.
You know what a politician sounds like on the job, but once they leave office, that's when they can share what's truly on their minds. I spoke to a dozen former members of parliament in Canada to hear in their own words.
Someone had written the C word on my campaign office.
What this job is really like.
Most of the hostility towards me was within my own party.
To get the big picture.
I feel like I completed the circle from being born alive, ending up as a member of parliament.
I loved my experience. I wouldn't have changed it for the world.
Why they left.
I'm tired of beating my head against this wall.
And what it cost them personally and professionally to serve their communities.
Honestly, I think this is the deepest I've ever talked about it.
You can hear all of these stories and more in Humans of the House, a brand new podcast from the Samara Centre for Democracy. Join me, Sabrina Dellen, on a journey exploring the human side of politics. Prepare to be surprised, maybe even moved by what really goes on in the House of Commons. Follow Humans of the House on your favorite podcast app.
I bet now, even though the voices weren't identified, Jen and Kevin, you could tell who said what immediately as soon as you heard them. They're very familiar with all of our 12 MPs by this point. And
you know what a politician sounds like.
See, we'll just go to the next slide here. And this is just sort of to give you a sense of a clip from the episode, hearing one of our interviewees speak more in depth. This is a small section from our second episode where former Liberal MP from Whitby, Ontario, Selena Caesar-Chavannes, talks about her first experience on Parliament Hill.
Earlier, we heard why all these MPs made the leap into politics, a field that most of us can be pretty skeptical about. And honestly, a lot of these MPs were initially skeptical too. That's why the idea of doing politics differently really appealed to Selena Caesar-Chavannes.
I was running with a government that said they were bold, transformative. Diversity is our strength. Add women, change politics. This is going to be transformative for Canada, right?
When she was sworn in as the Liberal MP for Whitby, Ontario, she was determined to represent bold change.
I come into Ottawa with the family. We're staying at the Delta, and I have a suitcase with stuff that I brought. And then I started thinking, I need to be Selena here. Everybody's going to take their picture, like the class photo, in the suits, in the gray or the black or the blue. They're going to be very structured, very sort of similar. And I already knew that I was going to stand out. I was the only Black woman elected out of 338 people. So I Selena-fied the first picture and came in a leather Karl Lagerfeld dress and a faux fur gilet and my BCBG stilettos. It was snowing so hard. That day, I just didn't understand. It was so cold. But I Selena-fied it. I was like, this is it. Like, this is how you represent for the class of 2015. Had some challenges, but I was running with a bold, transformative government who said diversity is our strength, add women, change politics, not dress like it's business as usual. So I was like, you got to show them that you're ready to go. You got to show up and glow up. Now this room is totally packed. People are sitting, and I'm at the front of the room. The reading room has this massive framed picture of the Fathers of Confederation. And my uncle looks at it, and he looks at, this, he'll always see me as a little girl, Black girl from Grenada, in her leather and her stilettos, and totally looking not like a politician, under this very, very specific picture. And he just said, the audacity of this young woman to be here. And when he said it at the time, I was kind of like, yeah, that's kind of cool. But when I reflected back on it, I said, yeah, you really have to be audacious. You really have to be bold to step into a space in a very specific way, knowing you have it sort of set the tone for the entire 4 years.
So that's just a little clip, but I think you can sort of get a sense of how the MPs talk from that clip and sort of the moment snapshots that they use to talk about their experience in the House of Commons, and also how you could use some of the discussions of, there's a really great assignment that Jen and Kevin did around the Fathers of Confederation picture, comparing that picture to the 2015 picture that Selena mentions. And so there's a lot of great moments in the podcast that have been picked up in the assignments to really spur student thinking. So that's just a really quick snapshot of the podcast itself, but I'd really like to get in now to talk about what we've created to make this podcast useful and easy for teaching civic education in your classroom. So we were, as I've said, just so pleased to partner with SSENC to create these curriculum connected resources based on the podcast. And you all really brought your knowledge of what works in the classroom and what resources are needed to easily incorporate this audio material into civic education teaching to create, engaging teaching material that is connected to each episode of this 6-part series. And just to be clear, these are free resources that are available on our website, and they've been specifically designed to help you illuminate the lived experience of Canadian politics in your classroom. So I'll walk you now through just some of the variety of resources that are on offer, from classroom presentations, time-stamped transcripts, vocabulary worksheets, listening activities, assignments, and more. So to start with, which courses can you use our podcast in? We've created an overview of Canadian curriculum links, so you can sort of easily find where Humans of the House teaching resources fit into your province's specific curriculum. And we have it broken down both by the whole series and by each particular episode. So if there's a particular episode you're interested in teaching, you can see for each province which courses it might work well in. And this is sort of a good starting point if you just want to get an overview in a sense and sort of start thinking about where it fits in well. We've developed full PowerPoint presentations for each episode, which provide an overview of the assignments, the vocabulary terms, an introduction to all of the MPs who are featured in the podcast, pre-listening, listening, and post-listening activities and extensions assignments, as well as links to supporting resources, so things that can help you teach them in the classroom. Here is an overview of the different assignments that we have on offer for each of the 6 specific episodes. So this is only an overview. There's a full assignment description for each of these activities provided. This is an example of an overview of the available assignments for the first episode, which is So You Want to Run. I don't know, Jen or Kevin, if you want to give any more details about that, but this is just sort of giving you a sense of the number of available assignments and the variety of them.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that we wanted to focus on is just to make it really easy for it to be flexible. That you guys were willing to do the timestamped transcript, so that if a teacher just wanted to play 10 minutes because they didn't have the full 45 minutes, they could just play that little segment and do that little activity. None of the activities do you have to do 4 different things to go to it. They can all be done independently. So.
And here is an example of the full vocabulary worksheet with an available answer key for each episode. So this is just if you want to provide students with this sort of vocabulary. There's also a link out to the Library of Parliament glossary, which has terms for both younger students and intermediate students. And we have a slideshow with bios for each of the MPs featured in the podcast. And each of these pictures here link out to a full biography with more information and context for the teacher. So depending on how in-depth you would like to go with these different MPs, you have available fuller biographies or snapshots like this. And this is an example of a 15 to 20 minute pre-listening activity based on the first episode of the podcast again, so you want to run. So it asks students to think about what attributes they consider to be important ones for an MP, and then to compare and spur a discussion about that to share with the class. And then the MPs themselves just address that in the podcast, so it's a nice point of comparison.
Yeah, and something we tried to do was to give an approximate time, how long it would take to do an activity. You mentioned 15-minute, and that's we felt it was what was user friendly for teachers. Okay, in terms of someone who's brand new to this, or if they're like Jen said, unable to watch or listen to a full episode, could they pick and choose, and could they tailor a lesson around a certain activity, so that it could always be extended, of course, but that there is, like you said, Beatrice, there is some suggested time frames for them.
Yes, absolutely. So this is what is available on the slideshow for each of the activities, but as mentioned, there's a full activity description for each of them, which includes the timestamps and the expected or estimated time that the activity might take. And here is and you can see here the timestamps above. So here's an example of a listening activity from the second episode of the podcast, Show Up and Glow Up. This activity highlights some of the civic knowledge communicated in the podcast. So for example, you learn about the difference between a motion and a bill, the process by which a bill is passed in the House of Commons. But what's great about this assignment, and what we try and do in the podcast, is encourage the students to connect to this knowledge through their own opinions and experiences, through putting themselves in the place of MPs, through connecting to it in a way outside of just sort of dry facts about a motion and a bill. So in Show Up and Glow Up, the difference between a motion and a bill is explained through MPs encountering that question and deciding how they're going to vote the first time, and having sort of an emotional experience about their first vote, and deciding if they're going to vote along party lines or perhaps follow their own instincts. And honestly, I learned the word negatived only in the process of putting together this podcast. So it's a learning experience for everyone. So this is an example of sort of the fuller assignment and rubric that's available for all of the different activities. This is a assignment related to the first episode, So You Want to Run. You can see it has activity length, as Kevin noted, and it asks students again to connect to the material in the podcast from their own sort of position, asking them to consider, would you go door to door to canvass for a political party? how things have changed in our society recently in terms of promoting or advertising political candidates and parties compared to what the MPs in the podcast experience. What would you do instead to support an MP or political party? And I think this is a great example of sort of one of the ways these assignments build off of the basis of the podcast to get students to sort of put themselves in the place of the MPs and to think about themselves in their own sort of civic position in society. So each of the assignments available has a version for students and then a version with answer keys for the teachers. And I know I have to acknowledge the amount of work that Jen and Kevin and everyone involved in putting these together put into doing full answer keys that take a lot of the guesswork out of it for teachers using it. So this is again an example from the first episode where MP for Winnipeg Centre, Robert Falcon Ouellette, discusses his political journey and entry into politics. So it's a very moving section I found in the first episode, and here he asks students to sort of recount it and talk about their memory of what he said, and there's a full sort of description of all the different aspects of his journey to becoming an MP.
Yeah, we were very aware that a lot of times a social studies teacher actually isn't a social studies expert. So we wanted to make sure we had the answer keys. And I have to admit, this is actually the first time I used AI extensively, because I had created an assignment that encouraged students to either research the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights, or the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, or the impact of the Indian Act on Indigenous peoples. And then I realized I had to write an answer key of what students should focus on for their research. So I went to AI and said, please help me write this answer key. And it did it in about 3 minutes. And of course, I had the knowledge to be able to make sure that the answer key was accurate, but boy, that sure did make my life easier.
And I can say that we at the Samara Centre also then went through the answer key. So this has had multiple teachers, researchers go through this, so it's all very approved. Whether or not you like using ChatGPT or not, it's been thoroughly vetted. So one of the main aims of Humans of the House is to communicate knowledge about how Canadian politics works in a way that's accessible and engaging. And that's why we chose to communicate facts about how a bill passes through the House and through the Senate through personal stories of MPs. That's just one example. And our SSENC partners, I feel like, really followed through with this approach and the assignments they created. So this is just one final example of a post-listening assignment that I personally love, because I think it does a lot to foster students thinking civically, but also hopefully strengthen communication between themselves and their MPs, and MPs to know that they should be responding and listening to young people in their communities. There are really so many examples of interesting assignments that connect the political knowledge communicated by MPs in the podcast to students' own civic experiences. So I just really encourage you to explore all the different creative assignments available in the free teaching resources on the website. This is I think a great example of just a creative assignment that students could really get excited about. So that's really, we come to the end of the presentation. It's been a broad overview of Humans of the House and the diverse teaching resources available. There's just so much there that you can really dig into. So I really encourage you to explore, dig around, see all of the many different assignments available. And the curriculum links, all the ways that exist on the website to help you incorporate it into the classroom. I really hope you enjoy listening to the stories of former MPs and that you find it useful in the classroom. And if you do, please let us know and share your thoughts about how they support learning in the classroom and any feedback you have. There's a survey on our website for your feedback. We want to continue to develop these resources so that they are helpful, that they can be of use in your classroom, that you can make the most out of the podcast. And I will add that Anyone who fills out the survey will get sent a free Humans of the House tote bag. I know Jen has been enjoying hers. Just thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about the podcast, about the teaching resources, and I'm sure Jen and Kevin can jump in as well.
Yeah, one of the only things I would add is that the all of the resources are in Google folders. And so it's really, really accessible that you can then just make a copy and you can drag and drop everything into your own personal folders of what you want to be able to use. And you can even adjust the resources or assignments to what you need by just making a copy and then take the pieces that you want. And I was sharing just before we started that I'll be gone for 2 days at the end of the month. And I was like, wait, I can use these resources because it's really easy for a sub to be able to help the students with these assignments that they don't have to have any background knowledge. So I was like, perfect. That's going to cover 2 classes right there.
Fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that. And yeah, absolutely. These resources are for you to adapt in any way that is useful for your class, your classroom. So feel free to make copies, do whatever you like. And then if you find there are particular ways you're using it that you would like to let us know about that you think could be incorporated into the resources for other teachers, please let us know about ways you're using it that we might not have thought of, and we can make that available. We want it to be as easy to use and as many teachers to use it as possible. So any feedback is very welcome.
So are there any other questions or things you're wondering about that Beatrice can try to answer, or maybe even other things about the center and resources that the center has?
Hi, I'm just kind of curious, like, okay, 6 episodes, and I love the different topics and different focuses of each one. I'm just kind of wondering, like, okay, if there was a time constraint, which there always is in education, if there was only one that would focus on and maybe give a really good snapshot, which would be the one?
I think it really depends on the class that you're teaching. I think each of them can be listened to in isolation. So I wouldn't worry about, just playing one, and the students would need to have the previous episode as context to understand it. Each serves as a standalone, even though they sort of tell a story if you listen to them together. So I would say it was really dependent on the class. I think that if it's sort of a classic Canadian politics course, I might say episode 4, Unwritten Rules, because it talks quite a lot about sort of party politics and gets into that content. And if it's as Jen said, a class that might have to do with gender and politics, episode 3 is a really strong one for that. It talks about gendered experiences of gendered harassment in the House of Commons. And episode 5 is also a great one for talking about how to make political change, and as Jen pointed out, really gets into Indigenous politics, talks about UNDRIP quite a bit in a really, I think, compelling way. So it is sort of just dependent on what sort of theme you would like to pursue specifically, but each can be listened to on their own. And for Jen, I hadn't thought about that, but absolutely right, from a careers perspective. Episode 6 is really interesting, and also episode 2.
Yeah, well, and I'm intrigued also for a class about making law, and making law from this standpoint of legislation too, and talking about which way to vote and make things happen that way. I find that really interesting too.
I think for that, I might say I'm going to say the F word is really good, because it does follow sort of MPs trying, like, the process of trying to make change, and seeing how, like, bills that get stopped in the Senate, bills that get stopped in committee, what it means to try and get a bill passed, and sort of the frustrations of it, but also the process.
Yeah, thank you. I like it.
Yeah, I totally get the time constraints. Like up to this point, I've just done little tiny pieces here and there. And then like I said, I had these 2 days. And so I don't know if you would say it's cheating, but literally what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the kids sign up and all 6 podcasts have to be listened to. And then they're going to have to make a creative display to educate their classmates on what they learned from the podcast that they listen to. And so that way every one of them gets covered. But yeah, it's almost, it sounds to everybody like spend a couple weekends and listen to all of them. And then you'll be able to hear kind of, you know what, that's the piece I need for this class.
Road trips, that's when I listen to my podcast.
Doing dishes is one of doing dishes or folding laundry is good podcast time as well. I would say that the curriculum links document is also good, so you can see sort of each individual episode where it might fit into different courses. And also, as Jen mentioned, you can also just take if it does require you listening to the episode yourself first of all, but you can just take, small sections like I played for you for that Selena Caesar Chauvin clip and use that in the classroom too. There are definitely sections of the podcast that can be listened to in isolation that don't need to be, you don't have to assign the full episode to students or play the full episode in the classroom for it to be useful.
I'm trying to do the classic teacher 10-second wait.
Right.
Just to see if there's any other. Kevin, do you have any other thoughts that you would want to share?
No, I would certainly encourage a listen, and I guess I go back to the idea that what I was trying to do in New Brunswick, because when I was promoting it here, is trying to find some examples of local MPs who are highlighted in it, and their stories. But no, I think it is it's a refreshing take. I think like you said in the intro, Beatrice, the fact that people are really unfettered by trying to score political points. They can be frank, they can be honest, and they can tell their tales. And for me, of all of them, I do think the last one I worked on, I listened to that one several times, but for me that one was if I was thinking of one episode to listen to, that one for me, in terms of the whole spirit of public service. Okay, people telling their tale about why they would they do it again, why or why not. And it was interesting in that you got to despite all the horror stories in some cases you would have heard in the previous 5 episodes, you got people say, yeah, I'd probably do it again, which was surprising, in many ways. So
I would say that's the one plug I would make for listening to the whole thing through the 6 episodes. I know that would be hard to do in a classroom necessarily, but it does tell a story that really has a lot of lows, but then upon reflection in the final episode, the
yeah,
sort of really poignant reflection on them doing it again and encouraging other people to run, and commitment to public service is sort of real through line through the podcast, and I think would be nice for students to hear and to experience.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Satali, I see your hand is up. I hope I pronounced your name right.
Yes, thank you, Sidlali. I just want to share that even though I am not an educator, I do see a lot of value in all the resources. I am just hunting for new things to get our community interested in running for office and also understanding how Canadian politics work. I serve in a community for Hispanics in the technology markets. And in general, we have a lot of leadership in corporations, but not enough in the political spectrum. So I just wanted to share that I will be sharing these resources with that community as well.
I'm very happy to hear that. I do think that we made this podcast for a broad audience in mind. We're really, really happy to get into high school classrooms, but I think that a lot of this, even, I mentioned I didn't know what negatived means. I think that there's a lot of adult education around the function of politics that this podcast helps facilitate. So I'm really glad to hear that. One of the comments we received on Apple reviews, somebody said that they'd worked in public service for 40 years and they learned some new things in that podcast, which is we took as a very complimentary review.
Absolutely. Jen?
Hi, sorry, I've been having some connectivity issues and stuff too, but I want to apologize for that. I've been fortunate to have spent some time in Ottawa for the Teachers Institute on Canadian Parliamentary Democracy. A lot of my colleagues here that are actually attending also have, and I find this is an extension a little bit of our experience there in being able to see politics as a human experience, and that really it's very enlightening, and I think these create really engaging and worthwhile resources for not just educators and students, but I'm really happy to hear that they're being used in that kind of realm. Vitaly was talking about and she says she's not in education. Guess what, girl? That's what you're doing, is educating people and trying to find a way to connect. And that's what we do as educators. And so thank you for the work that you do, Beatrice. That's really important to make this what we don't normally see as politics, in mainstream media, which is where a lot of we unfortunately get our information if we're not careful. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you. I'm really glad to hear that. And that's really underlines what we feel at the Samara Centre, which is we're really trying to promote a participatory and inclusive and engaging democracy. And that means, both having seeing the humanity in our elected officials, but also seeing civic education as something, and civic activity is something that's a lot more broad than just, voting and talking to our elected officials once in a blue moon. And I hope that these resources help support that. I'll make a plug for we have other resources on the Samara Centre site, particularly around, we have something called a field guide to online to digital conversation, which talks a little bit about digital literacy. And we see that this project is complementary to that, because we see a big problem in online political discourse is sort of a lack of acknowledging the humanity of the person that you're talking to. Particularly, we track online abuse towards elected officials. And this is something that I know Jen and Kevin are very familiar with, the MPs talk about in the podcast a lot, what it's like to be on the receiving side of online hate. So I think that's another avenue to discuss the podcast and use the podcast in classrooms when talking about sort of digital literacy. There's a place for the podcast there too, and other Samara Centre resources.
Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate everybody being here, and hopefully we've inspired you to take a look, try some things out, and then spread the word. Because again, I think the more we can get our youth engaged and excited, just like you said, right? The media today is so negative, and so if we can actually get them excited and seeing that they can have a voice and can participate, I think that could really bring about some great change. And so thank you so much for allowing us to participate in this process with you. And if anybody has any questions or anything, I'm assuming that your email is available to share. If people will reach out to me, I can then share your email with them.
Please do. I'm always happy to answer questions. I will say I am going on maternity leave in 2 days.
Congrats.
Thank you. That will be going to my wonderful acting research director, Andrea Grant, but she will be delighted to respond, and I will be back if the questions come a couple of months down the line.
Okay, perfect. Sounds great. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. We appreciate you being here, and have a wonderful rest of your week.